The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot see.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. If you've been following my work, you may have heard the origin of the name of this podcast and the book I published as its companion with the same title. Here's a brief refresher. In 2017, I was working with a public speaker as her storytelling coach. She hired me because she was recently diagnosed with MS and wasn't sure if or how she should include this aspect of her life in her keynote presentations. She told me the story of her diagnosis, her initial response to it, the support she received from her husband, family, and friends, and the research she did about the illness and potential treatments. I asked her why she was concerned about bringing this up in her public speaking engagements, and she said, "I just don't want to be known as that lady with MS." It was in that moment I realized something really important about stories. I said, "It's not what happens to you that defines you. It's how you talk about those things." Those words came to me because of my experience as a storyteller, a story listener, and an avid reader of stories. I didn't know there was an entire body of research about this, research that backed up my comment. Now, nearly 10 years have passed, and I've written a book on the topic, read countless studies, shared my thoughts on a TEDx stage, and I'm in the process of writing another book about how stories affect us and why it matters. And I'm learning more about this every day. And most importantly, I know that people need to be reminded of this over and over again. Stories are powerful. In the show notes for this episode on elkinsconsulting.com, you can find links to some of the research and citations I'll be referring to in the rest of this podcast. There's research showing that listening to and sharing stories together affect us physiologically through our hearts and through our brains. And there's a growing body of research about narrative identity. That's the study of how the stories we tell and the choice in how we tell them influence who we are, how we experience ourselves, and how we see our role in any given environment. I'm talking about the stories we tell ourselves internally, the stories we share with other people, and the stories that other people share about us. Here's an example of narrative identity. I failed a math test in 10th grade. I told myself that I failed it because I'm not very smart and I'm terrible at math. When I got home, I told my parents the story. I failed my math test today. The teacher didn't give me enough time. Maybe I didn't study enough, but I think I'm just not good at math. I'm not smart enough to get a good grade in math. I can't remember my parents' response. But if my mom is anything like I am, she likely said something like, "I wasn't that great at math either." Those stories became part of my identity, not because they were true, but because I believed they were. And all my future stories related to math were told through that lens. Stories are powerful. This week's episode came to me as I was working on my second book. I was adding yet another citation about research around how stories affect us. And for some reason, an interaction from years ago came back to me. It was a post on LinkedIn that I disagreed with. It was shared by someone I admire and respect. He was lamenting the criticisms and concerns people were bringing up about the story of Cinderella and their concerns about the messages that that story sends to girls. He said, "Sometimes a story is just a story." We'll set aside the fact that this person is a rabbi, a Jewish spiritual leader, and that his entire belief system is based on stories. But at the time, I didn't have the experience or relevant research that I have access to now, so I couldn't fully make my case. But I pushed back in the comments saying that I disagreed, that we couldn't pick and choose which stories had influence and impact and which didn't. I posted, "Can you honestly tell a 4-year-old that they're expected to learn lessons about morality and ethics in Bible stories and fables you share, but that they should ignore any possible lessons about the world they get through their fairy tales and the Disney films they watch?" I don't remember how the conversation ended. I think it was respectful, the idea that we would agree to disagree. But the truth is that a story is never just a story. This was years ago, and clearly the conversation is sticky. And I'm working on my second book, this companion to my TED Talk, The Power of Your Personal Story. The book is offering a deeper dive into the research behind how stories connect us, why that matters now more than ever, and how to use the ideal framework that I introduced in the TEDx talk. But in addition to working on my second book, I'm taking a course that will lead to a certification in Advanced Integrated Emotional Intelligence. It'll be another useful tool in my communication coaching toolkit. A module in the course is about the natural internal conflict we experience as humans between needing attachment and needing autonomy and agency. You and I both know that humans require attachment to survive. If you've ever seen a newborn baby, you know they would die without someone to feed and care for them. And we don't ever lose that need for attachment. It's why tribes exist. It's why we work so hard to fit in. It's why social acceptance is a huge part of our lives. While at the same time, we need to have our own opinions and feelings. We must have space to explore our identity outside of our communities. And that's the ultimate internal conflict. But stories help us make sense of that conflict. They also help us identify the people we need to support us, to help us survive. Every story you consume has the potential to influence you. Every story you share says something about who you are. It sends signals internally and externally. Stories are powerful. And this episode is your reminder to be conscious of the stories you're making through your behavior, the stories you're sharing, and the stories you're consuming. Listeners, now it's your turn. What childhood story popped into your head when you heard my story about not being good at math? Do you remember what stories other people shared with you or about you related to that story about your childhood? Can you put the story into greater context now? For me, math represents a huge subject area, encompassing everything from basic addition and subtraction, which I'm very good at, to algebra, geometry, and advanced calculations. I can see now that failing a math test, or even a whole semester of math, didn't mean I wasn't good at math overall, but maybe I just wasn't good at geometry. Can you think of an aspect of your identity that you love? Can you find a story to support where it came from and how it's been reinforced over time? Now that you have this reminder about the stories you share, what's one story you might choose to share differently? As always, thanks for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. If you're curious about working with me or hiring me to speak at your event, please visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com. Schedule time to chat and maybe sign up for periodic updates about my work. Please connect with me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook to learn more about what I do and to enjoy the content I share about Gallup's StrengthsFinder tool, storytelling, and public speaking.
You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.